Hello and welcome. My name's Craig and I'm the Head of Product Marketing for AppFox. We're a UK-based team who build innovative apps to help you get the most out of your favourite collaboration tools. In this session, we're going to be talking about documentation and document management and how it plays a critical role in the success of your project team. But don't run for the hills just yet. Whilst documentation is a less talked about topic in project management, it's still essential. And in this session, I'll share the experiences, top tips, and examples that can guide your teams to success. But before we dive in, let's set the scene first. How does documentation relate to project work, and where does document management fit in? As explained in this definition, documentation is the umbrella term for any document that is created as part of a project, and these are critical for success. Document management is closely linked to this because it's the process or the systems used to capture the documents throughout your project. And the challenges that teams face and the top tips that we're going to share in this presentation today relate to both document management and documentation. But why should we care about documentation and document management? Well, simply put, without it, projects are at a higher risk of communication breakdowns, which can lead to frustration within the project team, project delays due to poor planning and poor execution, increased costs due to misalignment, duplication, or milestones being missed, or scope creep due to inadequate processes and the lack of stakeholder engagement. And these are things we want to avoid in every project scenario. But if we're honest, the true reality is that documentation and document management are not just the less talked about parts of project management. They are also the less fun parts too. And this often contributes to the challenges that teams face. Now, you or your project team may relate to these images when it comes to documentation. Some of your team might put it off, or even forget to write the documentation altogether. Or better yet, you might be part of a project team and searching for a specific document or information, but you can't find it anywhere. And after speaking with loads of friends and colleagues, these scenarios are pretty common, and they're probably more common than we'd like to admit. Which brings us to the next question. Why does this happen? Well, there are loads of reasons, and in truth, your team may be affected by some of these more than others, but we've narrowed it down to 6 main challenges, and I'll jump into these now. Starting off with the first common challenge, it's easily deprioritized. You could be jumping from meeting to meeting or have to take care of something urgent that comes up, and documentation is usually the first thing to take a back seat. Next up, we have application overload. We're spoiled for choice when it comes to software and applications, and Okta recently released a report that stated the average number of apps per company stands at 88 today, with large enterprises having over 175 applications available. And this number is set to grow, which will only add to the current problem. And this can have a real impact on documentation as the project teams you're working with use multiple channels to communicate, share information, and store it as well. And this segues nicely onto the next point, which is information silos. With the vast number of applications and distributed workforces, it can be easy for information silos to form. This could be as simple as documents being stored on local devices rather than being shared with members of the project team. Starting off with the first common challenge, it's easily deprioritized. You could be jumping from meeting to meeting or have to take care of something urgent that comes up, and documentation is usually the first thing to take a back seat. Next up, we have application overload. We're spoiled for choice when it comes to software and applications, and Okta recently released a report that stated the average number of apps per company today stands at 88, and large enterprises have over 175 applications, and this number is predicted to grow, which will only add to the current problem that we face. This application overload can have a real impact on documentation and project teams because the teams you're working with will use multiple channels to communicate, share information, and store it. And the more channels that you have available, the greater this problem becomes. And this segues nicely onto my next point, which is information silos. As I mentioned, with the vast number of applications available and the fact that many workforces are distributed today, it can be really easy for these information silos to form. This could be as simple as documents being stored on local devices rather than being shared with members of the project team, or even information being retained in our brains and not being written down. Now, subject matter experts are great for project work, but it's important we share where appropriate. Next up, we have a lack of governance. There may be inconsistencies in the quality of the documentation you have and how it is managed. And this could be due to the processes you have in place or a lack of guidance around simple things such as naming conventions or templates. You may also experience confusion around who needs to review or approve documents at certain stages. And next up, we have time consuming. There's always a lot to be done in a project, and documentation does take a considerable amount of time, which can impact when and how it is done. And it's important we're mindful of this. And it brings me on to my final point, and we have to be completely honest. Documentation is never usually the most exciting part of a project. We're human after all, so it's important to recognize this fact and address it in the ways that we can. But despite these challenges, documentation plays a critical role in projects, and it affects every part of the project lifecycle from start all the way to the finish. Its true goal is to facilitate project success, and it helps keep your project teams aligned and make sure that any potential obstacles are identified and mitigated as early in the process as possible. So we've covered some of the challenges with project documentation, but how can we give our project teams the best chance of success? And this is where effective document management comes into the equation. By creating, managing, and sharing documents effectively, there are a number of benefits for projects. First up, we have the people side of things. People are more empowered to communicate effectively, and that could be with the project team, other stakeholders, or even the project sponsors. It can bring greater alignment to your project teams and reduce the risk of information silos. But it will also help give the important stakeholders the information they need in a timely manner. And if we're honest, it makes the project easier for everyone, which is a good thing. Next, we come to planning, and this is an essential part of any project. So effective document management will enable teams to plan more effectively, and sometimes we could argue quicker. It helps us identify and mitigate risks early in the process, and helps us organise project work into manageable amounts and informs our capacity planning. And linked to this, it can help us identify resource issues so these can be discussed as a team and also addressed. Moving on to the next point, we have measurement. Effective document management will help project teams better evaluate their performance, and it will also enable course correction if this is required. It helps us reallocate resources where it's needed in a timely manner, and most importantly, it helps inform our decision making throughout the entire project. And finally, we have governance, and this is a benefit that is really important but could be overlooked. Effective document management helps with the adherence to the policies and the procedures that your company works to, and this is particularly important for regulated industries. It helps ensure critical documents are reviewed and approved by the right people, and it can help keep your teams audit ready if that's important. It will help increase accountability within the team, and it will also help inform future projects. So the knowledge shared and the experiences learned can sometimes bring financial value to other project teams. And ultimately, all of these benefits together contribute to the success of a project and can often be the difference between success or failure. So what are our top tips for success? And how can your team overcome some of the challenges that we've discussed today? Well, there are loads of tips that your teams can use to help you be more effective with documentation and document management. And we've narrowed it down to these 6 based on our own experiences and speaking with a number of project managers and project teams. So first up, keep it simple. Like many things in life, simple is often better. An example of this could be using automation to reduce the amount of manual tasks that are required by your project teams. Next, we have standardize, and templates are a great example of this, and they can bring greater consistency that help save the time for your team. And examples of this could be meeting notes or requirements document. Similarly, you could look to standardize your approaches. As an example, you could look to standardize the tools that you use to share information, or use consistent file naming conventions. And finally, workflows can help standardize the process within your systems, and I'll come back to this shortly. Next up, we have use the right tools. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're spoiled for choice. So try to use the same tools as your colleagues, and where possible, keep this number as small as you can to reduce the risk of information silos. Next up, we have invest in planning. So agree at the beginning what documents will be produced, who will produce them, and when they'll be created. Add documentation to the project timeline and allocate it as a task to ensure it doesn't fall through the gaps. Encourage sharing. As I mentioned before, information silos can quickly develop, so where it's appropriate, encourage people to share and collaborate on files together. And there are enough tools out there to really help you do this. And finally, we have assign responsibility. It shouldn't all fall back on the project manager. So assign responsibility to the right team member and hold them accountable for their part of the project. As I mentioned earlier, we're spoiled for choice when it comes to tools. So to take this presentation a step further, I'm going to dive into how we manage project documentation and how you can further enhance your project management processes in projects. So as mentioned on the slide, let's focus on the right tools. Ideally, the tools that you use should be easily editable, even by non-technical teams, and ideally in real time. They should have an instant and reliable search function. They should have an intuitive navigation that makes it easy for everyone to use. And it should be really easy for people to organize their content. And finally, an added bonus, it should be able to integrate with other tools that you use to help keep your project assets in sync across your entire team. So we use Atlassian's Confluence, and to be completely honest, I can't imagine managing my projects without it. Now, for some of you watching, you may already be familiar with Confluence, but for those of you who are not, it's a central knowledge hub where you can create and collaborate on documents real time. And here you can see the general layout of Confluence, and many of the recommendations we have are included in Confluence out of the box, as you can see annotated on the screen. As mentioned, you can organize work into spaces. It has a powerful search built into it, and you can collaborate real time with your teammates in one place. It also helps you keep a track of versions, and this can be really important. And there is an active page history where you can see the previous versions of any page, and this can be easily accessed by you and your team. And to help standardize and improve consistency across your project team, there are a ton of templates available to help. If you don't like any of the ones that are available in the template library, which you can see on the screen, you can easily create your own and customize it the way you want. And this template is then available to the rest of your team to use in your project. And finally, whilst Confluence comes with loads of functionality out of the box, it doesn't have everything. And there's a thriving marketplace full of third-party apps that add awesome new features and functionality into Confluence. So if there's something that you're looking for and Confluence doesn't offer it out the box, the chances are you'll find a third-party app that can help you with that. Before I move into the final section, I just wanted to point out this super useful video. If you're not using Confluence for project management, but you're interested, I definitely recommend checking out this video on screen from Tactical Project Management. It's short, super helpful, and gives you a good insight into how Confluence can help you and your project teams with project management. We've spoken to many customers over the years about how we can help enhance document management in Confluence, and this is where our marketplace app, Workflows for Confluence, comes into the picture. It's packed with functionality, but in this presentation, I'm only going to have time to go through three that can help you and your project teams. So up first, we have the custom approval processes. Now this is great if you need to create very simple or complex approval processes, or maybe single or multi-stage. You can use the drag and drop editor that you see on the screen to create the document management process that is right for you and right for your team. In the review and approval process, you can add individual users. For example, if you had a project manager that needed to see a document before it's signed off, or you had a quality assurance team or a design team, whoever it may be, you can add these people as individual users. Or as you can see on the screen, you can also add groups. So if you had a predefined project approval group in Confluence, add them using workflows, and the document will automatically go to that group for their approval. Next up, we have workflow actions. So earlier in my presentation, I talked about the importance of automation. And what you can see here is in the workflow builder, all of the orange tiles are actions that you can add into your workflow. And these trigger automatically at a certain point of a workflow. So for example, as you can see in the demonstration, there's an email action that's been added to this workflow. And so when the page has reached that part of the process, or the document has reached that part of the process, I should say, then an email will automatically trigger and you can choose who receives it and you can customize what that email says. In addition, you can see the set permissions action here. Now this will help you restrict access to a document until it's reached a certain state. So this might be useful if you had a document that should only be visible to the wider group in Confluence once it has been approved or reach a certain status. And this is what you can use set permissions to easily configure in Confluence. And there are loads of other actions here, but the last one I'll touch upon is the Slack message, which you can see at the bottom. So if you're using Slack, you can automatically trigger messages to be sent to a specific Slack channel that maybe your project team are using to inform them that a document is ready for the review or it's reached a certain point in the process. And again, easy to add to the workflow, and it'll help reduce the manual steps required and help add some automation to the processes that you and your project teams are working to. And finally, we have auto-assign workflows. Now, the beauty of workflows at Confluence is that we know that one workflow doesn't fit every project or every document that you have or you're using. And so you can create multiple workflows for multiple different documents or projects, and these can automatically be applied to Confluence pages based on some information that they contain. So as an example, if a Confluence page had a label at the bottom of it, you could automatically trigger a specific workflow to be added to that page when that label is present. And on the screen, you can see two examples of this. So the first label you can see is project business case. Now, if this label was added to a page across your Confluence instance, it could automatically have the right workflow attached to it without having to click any buttons. It's on the page and ready to go. Similar to this, as you can see with engineering designs, if this label was added to a page, the workflow is automatically added to it and it's good to go from the beginning. So this is really powerful if you're using templates in Confluence. You could have a template, you could add a label to that template, and once any team member uses that template to create their project document, you know that the right workflow is automatically attached to that page from the beginning. Now, there are loads of features that Workflows for Confluence contains, and due to the time, I've only been able to focus on 3. But what I'd recommend is you can try it for free on the Atlassian Marketplace. So the Marketplace will allow you to have a 30-day free trial. It's a great way to test it out, see how it can work for you, try out some of the features that it contains, and just take it for a spin. So highly recommend you do that. And it's all accessible via the Atlassian Marketplace. So we're close to time, but if you have any other questions or want to chat to us, we'd love to hear from you. So come and join us at the food cart in the Wheelo space. If you're joining us live, we can continue the conversation there. However, if you're not able to join us afterwards or you're watching it on demand, please feel free to contact us directly via email at social@appfox.io. It's been an absolute honour to be part of PM72, and I'd like to thank Jexo, Resolution and Old Street Solutions for bringing this incredible event together for an amazing cause. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.